Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Gaming and the last video for the Smite Paladin character. This is a character I'm now at a position where if I wanted to push a lot further, I need to kind of rebuild how I've spec'd out the character, and I don't really want to do that. Each upgrade from here is going to be really expensive for minor increases. So this video is just going to go through how I've built the character, the thought process behind it, and how I feel the character has performed, and we'll go through the pros and cons of the character and the content that I've completed. We'll also run through all of the gear and skill links since this is the last video. I didn't really touch on it at all in the last episode. So we'll go through every item and kind of what's important if you wanted to build the character this way and what you need to look out for if you decided to invest in the way I've built the character. One of the most important things I've done since the last video is to make sure my DPS is a lot less reliant on flasks. Things that aren't going to be up 100% are good, but they can sort of distort what your actual DPS is if you're in a fight where you're not going to have flasks up or the bosses phase, like all of the T17 map bosses. So I wanted to get my DPS closer with my flask down than up. Now you may get a waste of a flask if I can get to 99% on a boss without it, but you need to consider that some things that give me crit in this build I won't have on mobs, but I'll have on bosses. So things like Assassin's Mark is only going to be on rares. I have big crit against blinded enemies, but I only have a 20% chance to blind. So again, as I'm running through blowing up packs, they won't be blinded. So the flask is definitely needed for mapping to make sure I stay 100%. But the idea was with the buffs I can get on a boss in a few seconds, that we limit that gap as small as possible between having flask down and up. And I think I've done that quite well. My character now, without flasks up, is around 18 to 26 million DPS, depending on how many relics are up, what sort of shock the enemy has, whether they're blinded. And it's definitely noticeable. When you get a big shock on an enemy, they get absolutely chunked. I also wanted to make sure the character had at least adequate defenses. It's not amazing, but it's got decent levels of armor and evasion. It's got damage mitigation through endurance charges, fortify, fizz taken as elemental, and some flat physical damage reduction. It has a little bit of life regen that's enough to sustain blood rage, and with pretty decent attack speed and big hits, instant leech feels really good. It's going to struggle on bosses that disappear and leave degens or mechanics to dodge, because then I've basically just got my life flask to either keep me alive or recover from a big hit or degen. The major upgrades I made from the last video are I managed to get a 2020 Vile Smite gem through corrupting them in Alva temples. I wanted a 2120. I did 5 of these Alvas and didn't get it. I just gave up because I was not enjoying it. It is a big damage increase. It adds about 1 million more DPS, but it's not going to make or break the character at this point. The last upgrade I made was I managed to get a Rakiata's Dance with Fortify Implicit. I think it cost 9 divines. This means that firstly, I have to move my gems across into the sword. So I had to 6 socket it, 6 link it, which costs more currency. Then I had to recolor it, which again costs more currency. But what this gives us is a level 10 fortify. So that comes with itself some increased melee damage. Also means I can get 20 fortification instead of the 17 from the tree. It also means I can drop 6 points from the passive tree that I was using to get fortify. So overall, this was a massive damage increase and well worth it. Now I do still have upgrades I can make. I can push for that 2120 Vile Smite. The problem is these only come from corrupting in Alva temples. I imagine there's much more expensive and lucrative gems that people are doing for profit. So these are very unlikely to come on the market unless someone is playing the build with the 2120 and they decide they want to play a different character. I can then buy that gem off them. I may try again in a few days, but at the moment I'm just a bit fed up of trying to get that corrupted gem to 2120. I can obviously get higher implicits in terms of Eater and Exarch on my gear, and I can just improve my gear in general. Like I think the stats I've got on them are about right, but I could obviously push them up to try and get T1 in most places, but this is where it starts to get really, really expensive for pretty minor games for someone who doesn't really care if they take the odd death and is never going to go and tackle things like Uber bosses or simulacrums. It just seems a bit silly pushing numbers in POB for no reason. I may as well save up the character to see if I want to start a different character, and then at least I've got a ton of currency to do that. Now I won't run through the tree as it's going to be in the POB. I don't feel there's anything particularly difficult to understand about the tree. It's fairly straightforward, so this is something that you can look at in your own time if you wanted to have a look at where I've pathed. Let's talk about the things I like and dislike about the character and ascendancy, and things to look out for if you try and copy the character. Now I have really enjoyed this character, but I do like Smite as a skill, so I always knew I was going to enjoy this character. It does perform really well. I haven't spent a fortune on the character, but it's not been cheap. However, replicating it might be expensive. I might say I've spent 50 divines on this character. You might go to build it and it might be 200 because there are some specific items that I've got that are volatile in the market because they're quite rare. They could become really expensive. So if we take a look at the Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewels, I bought these on about day 3 because I knew I'd probably want to use them at some point. I use Overwhelm, and this gives my sword 8% base crit instead of the standard 5 that you can't do anything about because it's a unique item. I paid 60C for one of the jewels and 1 divine for the other. At the moment, there's not many on the market and they're 4 and 6 divines. So you're talking 10 divines for the pair. If they then get bought up, it means people probably start pushing the price higher on those, knowing that they're probably sought after. And then the Fortify and Hit sword, I had to wait weeks for that to come available. Now, I was lazy. These swords are not particularly expensive now. You can pick a decently roll one up for 1 to 1.5 divines. You can then go and double corrupt it yourself, try and get the Fortify implicit. So the character on paper, I think, has pretty good DPS, but relics are a little bit annoying since you can't control which ones spawn. So even on bosses that are hitting maybe 6 to 8 times a second, you're not guaranteed to get all your 3 relics up because it might just produce the hatred one, then refresh it, then refresh it, then refresh it. So it can be a little bit annoying to not be able to rely on them for your full DPS. For a lot of fights where the boss might move around, have phases, because as soon as they occur, you lose all of your buffs. They also take damage, which is pretty annoying. When I'm in invitations, I often see them die to ground degens or big overlapping projectiles. It would be nice if these couldn't take damage. In terms of the Ascendancy, I think it's a great Ascendancy for a character that isn't that well geared. You can push up your increased duration of your relics to get them to about 7.5 seconds, which means they give you an absolutely insane DPS boost early on, and they work really well. As a character that's geared, I've noticed I can trounce through most content when the relics aren't even up, so it makes me think this Ascendancy now I'm geared probably doesn't give me that much, and I could probably look to move this character to another Ascendancy if I wanted to carry on playing Smite. So things like phase bosses, T17 bosses, simulacrums where you have downtime or you might have really tough enemies that might take you a little while to get through, there is a ramp up time for damage, and it does get a little bit annoying, and I would maybe like to play this character on an Ascendancy where it doesn't take so long to get your buffs up. And finally, I think the money I've spent on the skill and this character, I think if you went with a different skill and Ascendancy, you could get the same thing for a fraction of the price. However, that wasn't really the purpose of this build. The purpose of the build was to play Smite because I love it and just go in blind, play a Paladin and see how I get on. And even though I might have spent 4 times more currency than is needed to get this level of performance, I've really enjoyed it. It's been easy to farm currency on the character. I'm sitting on like 80 divines of excess currency that I haven't been able to spend on the character. So there's never been an issue where I felt the character couldn't tackle the content that I wanted to do. But if you were someone that wanted to go in and do Mega Juice T17 farming, maybe this character wouldn't hold up. I have no idea because I hate running T17 maps. It's too much micromanaging the mods for me. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the gear. What I'm going to go through is just what I looked for in each slot and go through the skill links. I will touch on Ascendancy and Pantheons, but they're all in the full POB if you wanted to go and look in detail at any aspects of the build. Apologies, I'm using my mechanical keyboard. I haven't switched it out, so if you do hear lots of clicking sounds, I do apologise. So let's start with the Pantheons that I'm running. Yeah, super loud. Because I'm Almond Immune, I don't need to run Soul of the Brian King. Ignore the fact I haven't upgraded these all the way. I'm super lazy. If I'd have actually upgraded this, I would have saved myself a lot of deaths on a T17 map where I didn't realise they had the mod for chaining projectiles and it was Abomination and there were like chained projectiles going everywhere and I died a few times. If I'd have actually upgraded my Pantheon, that wouldn't have happened. So I'd recommend upgrading it all the way. Gives you reduced LE damage taken, gives you good fizz reduction and movement speed when you're mapping. You avoid projectiles that are chained and you have 10% chance to just avoid projectiles completely. In terms of mapping at the moment, I've got Unaffected by Burning Ground on because I'm running Syrian Exile altars. I don't have a ton of life regen, so the Burning Ground does actually affect me quite a lot. In terms of the Ascendancy route that we've ended up with, we've obviously gone live to Divinity and Elemental Valiance to get the relics and enemies take more elemental damage. So I can bring the battle for 2 reasons. One, it gives us good damage when we taunt the enemy, which is just using Enduring Cry near an enemy. It also gives our War Cries infinite power, so we don't need an enemy nearby to Enduring Cry and get our 4 endurance charges up. And then we've gone for Utility Flasks have 40% increase effect. Because we're stacking armor and evasion, this gives us 40% increase effect of our armor and evasion flasks, along with the movement speed, crit chance. It's just a really good node to have when you're mapping, when your flasks are going to be up all of the time. As I said, I won't go over the tree. I'll just touch on my Lethal Pride, which I bought a long time ago. It's not particularly good. It just has 1 double damage and 1 rage on hit. And then we've got 2 large clusters, which are Sadist and Overshock. And then we have Sadist and Storm Rider. Storm Rider is what gives us power charges. Sadist is probably the most damage for a node on a large cluster duel because we have all of these 3 elements on an enemy pretty much at all times when we need it. And then Overshock just makes sure we hit that 50% shock on the majority of enemies. I've not gone into Uber bosses, but things like Syrian Exarch, Eater, Shaper, Uber Elder, they all get shocked to 50%, and that feels really nice. We're using the Bleed Mastery for single target because it's just an absolute ton of crit chance and crit multi. It pretty much makes up for a Diamond Flask. And I don't think there's anything else I really need to point out. I think there's probably optimizations I can make on the tree, but at the time I was looking at each point in POB. This seemed to be the best bang for my buck. It seems a bit strange going over here, but I'm not accuracy capped. So if I don't go here, I have to take this node anyway, and then I've only got 1 point to spend on the tree. It also gives us some attack speed, which the build is lacking because two-handed swords don't have the best attack speed. So let's go over the gear. I'm just going to go over the mods that I was looking for. These items could certainly be better, but I'm happy with where they are. I don't feel a need to like min-max or get rid of items and spend like 5 to 10 divines crafting better items because the build does what I want it to do. So I have our Rakiata's Dance with Fortify. Now, if you were to try and do this yourself and you were really min-maxing, you would obviously buy a sword that was uncorrupted, get it to so the stats are pretty decent using divine orbs, and then try and corrupt it. But this could end up costing you 40 or 50 divines for a sword if you get unlucky with A, the divine rolls, and B, the corruption. And this is a okay roll. It's rolled high on cold, sort of mid on lightning, and mid on attack speed. So not the best, but this is one I bought off the market. I then 6-socketed it and 6-linked it, which you've got to do through the tainted currencies. And then again, I coloured it to 2 blue, 2 red. I actually did that using the crafting bench and just 1 blue socket and just went with Val Orbs and chromatics until I hit the correct colours. You could also just spam tainted chromatics on that. So obviously the gems need to go in here. This does free up another 6-link, which at the moment I've actually broke my 6-link and put it back to a normal link because I didn't want to buy another chest armour. But you could probably get some auras going in here if you wanted to, but I'll go through kind of the setup that I've gone with. So now I've covered off the sword, let's go through the gem links first and then I'll go through the rest of the gear. I just wanted to point out that the gems needed to be in the sword because of the implicit. So we got our Val Smite, which is actually 2023, so that gives us a little bit more area damage. We've got that link to increased crit damage, volatility support, multi-strike support, LE damage with attacks, and then Trinity. Obviously, if you want to spend a fortune, you could do Awakened Multi-Strike and Awakened LE damage with attacks, but I just haven't felt it necessary for the content that I want to do. In the body armor, we have an Enlighten, which I don't need. I've just got one, so I might as well level it up. Could probably put some quality on this to actually level it quicker. Determination and then Grace. And then we have Leap Slam linked to faster attack for our movement ability. Got a Molten Shell linked to casting damage taken for a bit of extra defenses when we get hit. Blood Rage for increased attack speed and then Frenzy Charges when we're mapping. Flame Dash just because if I get Grasping Vines on me, Leap Slam doesn't get rid of those. Got Urgent Orders linked to Enduring Cry for quick war cries. Precision linked to Arrogance, which reserves it from my life so I don't have to worry about literally running no mana. And then we've got Life Tap, Assassin's Mark, Mark on Hit. That's kind of the setup that I've gone with. It works pretty well. There's probably other things you could do with the fact you've got 2 6-links. So in terms of the helmet, we've gone for Fizz damage taken as any elemental as an implicit and then reduced mana cost of attacks. Just big life, armor, evasion, resistances on this item is all that I wanted. Helmets don't have particularly good mods that you can roll, even with the crafting bench. So it was always going to be just pack as much as I can into this helmet. The amulet could definitely be better. I've had this for a while, but I need lots of intelligence because I don't have any on any of my gear, and I need to hit about 120 to be able to run crit damage. So we've got a gate amulet with massive intelligence that has also got attribute catalyst on it. Big life, crit multi, a big resistance, and then -7 to total mana cost. I'm not someone who likes running out of mana. I may have gone overkill on my reduced mana cost, but it's just comfy for me. I'd rather give up like 4% DPS and just have a bit more of a comfy experience. The first ring is, again, just resistances. I need strength, so that's why this is on here. Life, non-channeling skills, pretty standard. It'd be nice to have some damage on this, but the accuracy actually, again, saves me taking a point on the tree. The other one, we've got some damage on here. We've got some resistances, life, and again, non-channeling skills. So the rings are basically just bog standard, big life and resistance rings, nothing special. You could stick a taming in here. You could get double elemental damage in prefixes. There's loads you could do in here if you wanted to eke out damage. The body armor I don't think is amazing, but it's good enough. We've got some physical damage reduction, chaos resistance, fire resistance, pretty decent armor and evasion, and I needed the prefix to be able to get ailment immune, so that's why I've crafted the avoid elemental ailments. I've avoided life, which means I can use the mastery on the tree to get 15% more life. The gloves are pretty good. I don't really want to go recrafting these because I think I've hit pretty good mods. We've got big life, big chaos resistance, half decent cold resistance, some armor and evasion, and then we've got our +2 strike, implicit, and suppressed spell damage. The reason for the physical converted as cold is I think it was actually a bug, but I'm sure I died to physical reflect in a map, which to be honest should be impossible with tiny amounts of phys reflect I've got, but I definitely dropped dead on a phys reflect map where no one touched me. I've actually just kept this implicit because the only good implicit really that you can craft on gloves is a little bit of extra life or damage while leeching, and we very rarely leech. Our mana pretty much stays at max because one hit and we leech our mana back. Life, again, because we've got instant leech, we're almost always at full life, so I really don't think damage or leeching would do anything to this build. So I've just gone fizz converted as cold just to turn a little bit of fizz damage into cold damage. It's probably about 1.5% DPS, if that. The boots I've had for a long time. Again, if I was to replace an item, it would be these. They're quite weak. I could definitely get the spell suppression up, which might mean I can drop a node or two on the tree. So we're going for increased action speed, avoid early ailments, which I need the 17%. Life, resistances, movement speed. If I was to upgrade an item, it would be these. And then we have our belt, which is perseverance, which actually adds a ridiculous amount of damage. It pretty much gives us, when our flasks are up, about almost half of our DPS, I would say, because we get up to about 50,000 armor, 50,000 evasion. That gives a lot of extra damage. It also gives us the onslaught while we're fortified. If we didn't run it, we'd need to find onslaught somewhere else, and we need to make up a metric ton of damage. The original idea was to maybe farm a mage blood, but it actually isn't as good as perseverance. Yes, you have the fact that your flasks are up all of the time, which is nice and comfy, but we lose all of that increased damage. So I'm sticking with perseverance. I think for a belt that costs like a chaos or two is amazing. The flasks are the one thing I should re-roll because they're like tier 3, and flasks make quite a big difference because of our ascendancy. But again, I'm a lazy gamer. I work. I do stuff in my spare time. I don't really want to spend 30 minutes alt crafting my flasks. So we got diamond flask with crit chance, granite flask with armor, jade flask with evasion, and then a quicksilver flask with movement speed. Pretty straightforward. And that's kind of it for the character. I don't think there's really much more to go through. I say it's not necessarily a build I'm recommending. This isn't a video where I'm like, here is the best build in Phrecia, because it's not. But I've had a ton of fun building it. All I would say is if you have a skill you think you want to build around and you've got a little bit of currency to get yourself going, just go and try it. This event's only going to be here once. Don't play safe. Go and play a ton of crazy characters. Even if they don't work, you'll probably have some fun trying to get them to fit. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and see you in the next video.